Welcome to the School of Wisdom, a weekly podcast produced for the Bible Bistro, studying the book of Proverbs chapter by chapter. My son, hear the instruction of your father. Forsake not the law of your mother, for they shall be an ornament of grace to your head, and chains about your neck. Now, this week's lesson. Hey there, friends. Welcome back to the School of Wisdom podcast here in the Bible Bistro. This week, chapter 26 in the book of Proverbs. And this chapter is highlighted by the fact that we have the fool identified for us in the first 12 verses. That is, Solomon takes a lot of pains here to outline for us who the fool is. We're going to ask that question here in just a minute. Who is the fool? Because the first 12 verses, well, minus verse 2, we have the fool outlined for us very clearly. So we're going to look at some of the things that we find here about the fool. So why don't I just go ahead and read for you verses 1 through 12. As snow in summer and as rain in harvest, so honor is not seemly for a fool. As the bird by wandering, as the swallow by flying, so the curse, causeless, shall not come. A whip for the horse, a bridle for the ass, and a rod for the fool's back. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. He that sendeth a message by the hand of a fool cutteth off the feet and drinketh damage. The legs of the lame are not equal, so is a parable in the mouth of a fool. As he that bindeth a stone in a sling, so is he that giveth honor to a fool. As a thorn goeth up into the hand of a drunkard, so is a parable in the mouth of a fool. The great God hath formed all things, both rewardeth the fool and rewardeth transgressors. As a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returns to his folly. Seest thou a man wise in his own conceits? There is more hope of a fool than of him. Now we'll stop right there in verse 12. And if you have access to the interweb, I hope you'll go to my-dailydose.com. Let me try that again. my-dailydose.com. You'll find there the outline for these studies in the book of Proverbs. And here you'll see, as you're looking at the outline, fool is highlighted and he is set aside here. And you'll notice the blue coloring there highlights the fool and how many times he occurs in these first 12 verses. So who is the fool? That's the thing that we're being instructed in here is, how do you identify a fool? Well, first of all, you have to notice that a fool and honor don't go together. So that's the very first thing about the fool. And you'll notice that the writer here, Solomon, takes up in verse 1 as well as in verse 8 this idea of honor and fool. They just don't go together. It's not seemly for a fool to have honor because he's a fool. So honor comes by trustworthiness. Honor comes by understanding. Honor comes by learning. Honor comes by patience and discipline and diligence and so forth. Humility. All that is where honor comes from. The fool has none of those things. And so to have honor is just not right. And look at his first illustration there, as snow in summer and as rain in harvest. Well, if you have rain in the harvest time, you've got trouble because that's going to damage and ruin crops. Well, so honor for a fool is just not right. They don't have it, they don't deserve it, they've not earned it. Verse 3, a whip for the horse, a bridle for the ass, and a rod for the fool's back. We know why we need a whip for the horse. We need it to make him go. We know why we need a bridle for the ass. We need it to control him or her. A rod for the fool's back is because the fool needs discipline. The rod here is that instrument of discipline. And so, number 1, the fool has no honor. Number 2, the fool needs discipline. Number 3, the fool is not trustworthy. You'll notice it there in, verse 6. He that sendeth a message by the hand of a fool cutteth off the feet and drinketh damage. You don't give a fool a message that you want to make to its target. You don't do that because the fool is not going to get there. And if you do, well, then you're trusting your message into the hands of someone who can't do it. So they're not trustworthy at all. So number one, a fool has no honor. Number two, the fool needs discipline. Number three, the fool is not trustworthy. You cannot hand him off something of importance and expect him to do it. You'll notice then in verse 7 and also in verse 9, the parable is used. The legs of the lame are not equal, so is a parable in the mouth of a fool, in the mouth of fools. As a thorn goeth up into the hand of the drunkard, so is a parable in the mouth of fools. So the B part of the couplet is the same in both 7 and 9. And what this tells us is there's no understanding. He can't use a parable. He doesn't know how to use a parable. He doesn't understand the point of the parable. And so to put a parable in the mouth of a fool is, well, it's just not a good idea, because he's never going to understand how to use it, and he's never going to be able not to hurt himself by it. You'll notice also the word conceit shows up here in the first 15 verses 3 times, twice here in this passage about the fool. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. And then in verse 12 he says, Seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him. So the idea of conceit here is connected with foolishness. Fools are conceited. They think they know everything. They think they've got it all figured out. And so they're proud of what they don't even know. Again, no honor. They need discipline. They're not trustworthy. They have no understanding. And they're conceited. So that's what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things now. Number 10, verse 10. The great God that formed all things both rewardeth the fool and rewardeth transgressors. The fool will be judged. Don't make a mistake about that. The fool will be judged because he despises God as well. And remember what the psalmist tells us. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So God's going to judge that. His conceit, his lack of honor, all that, it's his transgression, and it's going to lead to judgment. And that's number 6. Number 7, then, is that the fool never really learns. Notice there in verse 11, as a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool returns to his folly. So even though he has left his folly for a moment, it doesn't mean that he's going to stay gone, because here he doesn't learn his lesson. Even though the lesson has been applied, even though discipline has been given, he can't learn. So he doesn't learn, and that's another thing that tells us about the fool. So these 7 things: he has no honor, he needs discipline, he's not trustworthy, he has no understanding, he's conceited, he will be judged of God, and he does not learn. Now there are a couple of things here that I also want to point out. Number 1, verse 12, you see a man wise in his own conceits. Now, we think of the fool here, right? Because we've already been told, you answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. And then we said, if you see a man wise in his own conceit, there's more hope of a fool than of him. So a fool has hope, but it's slim. A man who's wise in his own conceit, in his pride and his arrogance, so forth, well, there's no hope because he doesn't see his error. That's one thing. And then the other, verses 4 and 5, are just mirror images of one another. Answer not, and answer. A fool according to his folly. If you answer a fool according to his folly, you do it so that he won't be wise in his own conceit. If you answer not a fool according to his folly, you do that so that you won't be like him. People will say, if you engage a fool in his foolish questions, people are going to say you're a fool too, because you've done that. We have both situations, and it just takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of practice to know which one you should follow when you're in the presence of a fool. Sometimes you keep your mouth shut. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you feel like a nut. Sometimes you don't. The slothful, then, is the next one that we're going to find out about here. It's only 4 verses long, 13 through 16. The slothful man hath said, there's a lion in the way, a lion is in the streets. As the door turns upon its hinges, so does the slothful upon his bed. The slothful hideth his hand in his bosom. It grieveth him to bring it again to his mouth. The sluggard is wiser in his own conceit than 7 men that can render a reason. Okay, who is this slothful man, this sluggard? And you'll notice if you have the outline that I have those highlighted for you, and this section is set off by itself. So who is the sluggard? Well, he's the guy that always has an excuse for not working. He says, there's a lion in the way. There's a lion in the streets. Of course, there's no lion in the streets. But because he thinks there's something bad out there, he's definitely not going outside. That's his excuse. He doesn't even try. And he doesn't even try when he knows that he could be helped by a little effort. That's the slothful man. That's the sluggard. So that's number 1. Number 2, as a door turns upon his hinges, so doth the slothful upon his bed. He's lazy. He doesn't like to get out of bed. He just likes to roll back over and go to sleep again. And he stays in bed most of the day. So the slothful upon his bed shows us that this fellow is a lazy guy. He's always got an excuse, and he's lazy. And then it says, the sluggard is wiser in his own conceit than 7 men that can render a reason. Well, he's the smartest one in the room, isn't he? He's the one that can give you an answer. Always the sluggard has an answer for everything, but it doesn't do him any good. And of course, he thinks he's wiser than everybody else in the room. Smartest one in the room, that's the sluggard, and yet he's a sluggard. So 3 things there about the sluggard. Always an excuse, he's lazy, and he thinks he's the smartest one in the room. Verse 17 begins the section that I've entitled there on the outline, The Burnings of a Talebearer. We have those 2 themes here, fire and the use of the mouth, quickly highlighted here, and actually in this section as well as in the next, warnings about the angry and deceitful man. Well, here, the burnings of a talebearer begins in verse 17. He that passes by and meddles with strife, belonging not to him, is like one that takes a dog by the ears. As a madman who casts firebrands, arrows, and death, so is the man that deceives his neighbor and says, Am I not in sport? Where no wood is, the fire goes out. Where there is no talebearer, the strife ceases. As coals are to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are as wounds. They go down into the innermost parts of the belly. Burning lips and a wicked heart are like a potsherd covered with silver dross. So there's one thing that is very clear here, and that is that what you're doing with your mouth is very important. But that first one, we start off there, a man who passes by and meddles with strife that doesn't belong to him. Don't we have enough strife in our own lives that we have to meddle with somebody else's? Well, the proverb writer here, Solomon, says the guy who does that is like someone who takes a dog by the ears. Once you take a dog up by the ears, friend, you better not let go, because you're going to get bit. So they apparently have no wisdom whatsoever. This also is a fool. A madman who casts firebrands, arrows, and death. Now, can you imagine that? Casting firebrands, arrows, and death. So is the man that deceives his neighbor and says, Am I not in sport? That is, I didn't mean anything by it. Wasn't that funny? No, it's not funny. So if you deceive your neighbor and you do it because you think you can and because you think it's funny and you want to get something up over on your neighbor, friends, be careful of that. That's foolishness as well. Where no wood is, there the fire goes out. Where there is no talebearer, the strife ceases. Well, that's so true, isn't it? This goes right back to our problem of hypocrisy and gossip. Gossip is a canker that will eat through the fabric of any organization. So if you can get rid of the talebearer, you're going to get rid of the strife. And again, notice 22. The words of a talebearer are as wounds. Well, wounds inside are worse than wounds outside, because wounds inside cannot be healed. At least not with medicine that we can put on them. And then you notice there in verse 23, burning lips and a wicked heart like a potsherd covered with silver dross. It's got a little bit of silver in it, the dross does, always has. And so it's very difficult to extract all the silver from the dross. When you put it on a potsherd and cover it, it looks awful pretty. But it's worthless because it's dross and it's on a potsherd, which will break. So the whole thing is worthless. Burning lips and a wicked heart, they're worthless. So don't even listen to them. Don't entertain them. As a matter of fact, put the talebearer out. And then we end the chapter in 24 through 28 with warnings about the angry and deceitful man. And I've just underlined there where the word hate or hatred occurs, 24, 26, and 28. It's just one of those things that what we say, how we say it, ladies and gentlemen, can have such an impact, not only on us, but on those that listen to us. This is the warning about the angry and deceitful man, and you'll notice that it's his lips that are in question there in verse 24. He speaks fair in verse 25. 26, it's deceit. 28, he has a tongue that hates those, and he has a flattering mouth. So the tongue, the lips, the mouth, the speech, it's all bad, and it's all angry, and it's set on fire of anger. He that hateth dissembleth with his lips, and layeth up deceit within him. When he speaketh fair, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. So 25 is still speaking about what he just said in 24. 26, whose hatred is covered by deceit, still talking about the same man. His wickedness shall be showed before the whole congregation. 27, whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolleth the stone, it will return upon him. Well, that's exactly what the person who's dissembling with his lips is doing. A lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it, and a flattering mouth worketh ruin. So the tongue, the lips, the mouth, all working in concert with the heart that is filled with hate and deceit. There's nothing here to be trusted, and this too is foolish. Join me again next week, and we're going to be looking at chapter 27 on the School of Wisdom podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to the School of Wisdom podcast. If you're listening to this over YouTube, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so that you'll be notified every time one of these podcasts is uploaded. I really appreciate all my followers, and I try to respond to each and every one of your questions. Come again next week, and we'll enjoy another lesson in the School of Wisdom.